Hello, HealthTech listeners. I'm your host this week, Justine Abson. This is the podcast where we tackle some of the trending topics, ideas, and best practices across health and social care. This week, I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Lauren Morgan, who is Director at Morgan Human Systems Ltd and a key figure in healthcare governance and safety. As a contributor to the NHS England's Patient Safety Incident Response Framework and an expert in research, documentation and frameworks, Lauren shares her insights on the recent changes in PSIRF, governance and the critical role of technology in enhancing patient safety. Lauren, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks. What a lovely intro. Thank you.
I have got our comms exec Becca to thank for that. She always writes a fantastic intro. So yeah, thanks Becca. So as we're going to discuss, PSIRF's latest developments, how integrating technology can revolutionise safety in healthcare, can you start by just telling us a little bit about you and your background within the sector?
Oh, thanks. Yes. So I first worked in healthcare when I joined a research project on the safe delivery of surgical services in Oxford in 2009. And the genius of that project was that we were within a large teaching hospital, sent out to lots of different hospital sites. And we were put in pairs with clinicians. I had the benefit of being with a lovely female surgeon, Eleanor Robertson at the time, and she taught me so much of being in that clinical space. And so that was my kind of introduction to healthcare, and I've never left. I loved it so much, being in that space, trying to make a difference to clinicians' lives by applying the kind of principles of human factors. In 2021, 2020, I set up my own consultancy. You mentioned at the start, Morgan Human Systems, and how that's enabled me to work with a really big range of different healthcare providers, not just in acute physical healthcare, but across the whole patch. And I also did a bit of a dally in working inside an acute trust in 2021 off the back of COVID to kind of give them a bit of a helping hand in the governance team. And I think it's really important that when we're working outside healthcare that we remember what it's like to work on the inside of healthcare. And that's, I love working with that trust and still support them a lot to this day. So yeah, I've been inside hospitals for a long time.
It's really interesting that you mentioned that since being part of healthcare, you've never left, because I think we find that so often within this podcast when we're interviewing people from across the sector. And I've only worked at Radar Healthcare for 3 years, but I can't imagine now not working within this sector. I think it's just quite a special one.
Yeah, it's really varied, isn't it? No day's the same. No trust is the same. No area of healthcare is the same. And everyone is there because they care. So you meet such lovely, lovely, lovely people. And I think that's honestly the best bit, the staff that work there and the patients who are us as well, who use it. So yeah, it's a very people-centric profession, and I love people. So it kind of suits me.
I couldn't agree more. And again, that is exactly the thing we hear throughout all of these episodes, is how much people care. So it's such a nice way to start this episode as well, like reflecting on that as well. I want to chat a little bit about PSIRF. So you recently played a role in writing the oversight specification for NHS England and therefore contributing to PSIRF. Can you start by reminding our listeners what PSIRF is and what positives you see as a result of this framework?
So PSIRF is the replacement for the Serious Incident Framework. So PSIRF stands for the Patient Safety Incident Response Framework. And it's really lovely to be reflecting upon the implementation of it now, a couple of years in. So most providers will have implemented a version of PSIRF now. And what we're seeing is a massive cultural shift in our organisations. So organisations realising that PSIRF is a cultural change piece of work, and that compassionate engagement element as being really central to what we're doing. So rather than focusing on looking at the level of harm and making sure that we do an investigation of a set level of harm, actually we see organisations that are centering the patient's voice, centering staff voice, and making sure that we're learning stuff that allows us to change for good rather than just superficial blame, shame, train. That was never how the SI framework was set up. It's just how we ended up implementing it in the NHS. It's a bit of a cautionary tale in PSIRF, really, to make sure that we continue with the positives that we're seeing in organisations now and don't end up back down an SI route. So no, it's really positive. And the biggest thing is about how we see families being engaged and helping them on their healing journey as a result of being involved in these investigations.
It's really interesting, isn't it, that there's this, people have wanted to concentrate on the good for so long, I think, but they've just never really had the sort of it's not even processes, but almost the ability to be able to do it when there's constantly the negative. So it's really interesting to sort of see that this framework is actually focused to be able to help that. And we recently put out a podcast as well a couple of weeks ago about appreciative inquiry, and the kind of the how that's helping with all of this as well. And I just find it such a positive, optimistic kind of view on it all as well now, which is really interesting.
Because workers create safety far more than they harm safety, right? So we must be learning from when we manage to help everything. It might not go right, but it might go right enough. And we can work with families, with patients, and with the staff involved to get us to have more resilient systems. So I think I listened to that podcast. It was really useful. And I recommend it to others. I think appreciative inquiry is such a powerful tool to help that. And really, that's such an important part of the cultural piece that we were talking about earlier, about how we get that balance in the culture in our organisations, that we're looking at everything that happens.
What about the challenges? I know obviously we've just mentioned that, things don't always go right, and everybody's human at the end of the day. So in terms of some of the key governance challenges that healthcare providers might face when implementing this framework, can you chat to us a little bit about those that you've come across?
Yeah, PSIRF is really flexible. So it allows organisations to really take their own approach. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach at all. And from a provider board point of view, or from an oversight perspective, that's really difficult because your organisation's approach might be different to a neighbouring organisation. And that means that you really have to understand the nuance to be able to understand the information that's coming to you. So PSIRF's not really a numbers game, it's more of a culture game. And so trying to get a grasp on what that looks like in the organisation is really difficult. So what good looks like is defined in the standards, the investigation standards, and boards are starting to get to that. But I think getting a grasp on making sure that we've got our focus in the right areas is trickier for boards. And we see a lot of requests for support in how do boards know what good looks like? What should a board report look like under PSIRF? How do we know we've got this right? How do we know that we're improving? How do we know we got our implementation right? Which is natural, that time into implementing PSIRF. But I think that, the governance structure and what governance looks like under PSIRF is quite a challenge at the moment.
It's definitely something that we find across our kind of our customers. So we've got customers across the whole of health and social care, and it's certainly something that we try to kind of bring together a little bit more. So we have like user groups and things like that. So NHS trusts can learn from other trusts, but more importantly, like the size of them as well. So like you said, this isn't a one size fits all framework. So it's almost learning from the best practice that other people are doing, but at similar kind of levels to what you're at as well, and not trying to almost run before you can walk, I think, as well.
Yeah, and provider boards are becoming the squeezed middle, as the organisational culture matures and it's being proportionate in how it responds to incidents. It's being sensitive to the needs of the organisation. But externally, we have a media that's asking for us to lead investigations into everything. And sometimes even NHS England, who's pushing us to investigate things, the board's trying to sit and balance that in an organisation. And that's really challenging and requires boards to be, we shouldn't have to be asking our boards to be brave, but at the moment in PSIRF, it feels like we're having to, as they hold the line on what they've said they're going to do in their plan and trying to do that. So I think, it's a tricky time, but a really exciting time where actually we can see big shifts in some organisations that have been able to implement this well.
Yeah, definitely going in the right direction, which is always a good place to be.
Yeah.
You touched at the very beginning when you were telling us about yourself and your kind of background that you've been involved across different sectors, so acute care, mental health, ambulance services. So how do you see PSIRF framework adapting to the specific needs of these different services?
So I'm a training provider, so I provide PSIRF training to all different organisations. And so we've really had to adapt our training needs for those different organisations to think about what they need and what PSIRF can deliver for them. I think the 4 principles under PSIRF are really consistent across all of them, and the same opportunities to improve are there. I think the challenges are different in those different organisations. So ambulance sectors, as an example, have historically had huge numbers of serious incidents. And so for them, the shift to a more proportionate response feels much, much bigger if we contrast them against let's pick an orthopedic hospital, just focusing on orthopedics. There's a couple of them around the country. They would be doing tiny numbers of SI. So the challenge to be proportionate is different in those different types of organizations. And then if we take mental health, actually they lead the way in much of thinking about compassionate engagement, what that looks like. They've learnt what a therapeutic relationship looks like. They know how to speak to families and how to look after individuals in mental health distress. So they're really leading the way in the compassionate engagement frame. So we can take examples from certain sectors and lend it into others, and we can also learn from certain sectors of what they're really struggling with and try and iterate PSIRF so that it's still fit for everyone. And of course, we've got the primary care pilots that are coming up now, so doing a bit of work with them and trying to help them understand what a primary care implementation of PSIRF will look like. So it will work, and it does work for all of them. And I think the benefits of it is that we can learn from each other. And I think the challenges of it, those sectors are more than ready to sort of lean into those challenges. And that's really positive to see.
I love that. I love that something that everyone could take away from this episode is that what can you learn from other sectors? And like you just said, like some sectors are stronger in certain things than others. And with PSIRF kind of focusing on patient, staff, families, all of the kind of the areas that are involved, it's really interesting to think that actually if you look at those different sectors and look at what they're strongest in potentially around those areas, what can you take away from it? So I think that's a really strong thing that people could take away from this episode, hopefully.
I think so. And as well, thinking about our different patient cohorts and our communities that we serve. So I was with a trust the other day for which 96% of their surrounding population are white British. And so they know from their recent CQC report that they're not great with looking at equality and diversity. We were saying, right, okay, well, lean into an organisation for which their population doesn't look like that and understand how they're meeting the needs of their population. And then you'll have some keys for how you can do that. Birmingham Community Trust, brilliant trust, thinking about what their community needs are, and they're leaning into their learning disabilities group to figure out what should a report look like for individuals who have learning disabilities. How can we make those adaptations? How can we provide what an easy read version of a PSII report might look like? And so, different trusts, like you say, have those different areas of expertise. And I think, I missed it in the beginning when you asked about the good things that we've seen out of PSIRF. One of the amazing things I think is about the community of practice that's built on the Features platform. Sometimes it could be a bit kinder. We need to be a bit kinder to each other. But what we've seen is an amazing sharing of intel, sharing of advice. People are really happy to share documents, share ideas. We never had that under the SIF. We never had any of that community of support. And I think, governance teams can be a lonely place sometimes. And I think what that's given us is this feel for our colleagues that are also doing the same work out there. And I think leaning into that is a really big positive for PSIRF.
Especially like you said, it's, we've heard that before about governance teams. And if they're smaller teams and there's only a few people in them, or sometimes there's just one person starting this stuff, actually having that network of people that you can ask that are in the same sort of profession as that you're in and trying to get the same the same kind of results out of it as well, the same aims, the same goals, must be really helpful just to bounce ideas around and, like you said, to share documentation, to do the things that, rather than everybody spending the time doing exactly the same thing, you can kind of share that stuff between you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed. And I've seen many teams really helping each other do that. And that's part of, being an external consultant. I see it's such a privilege because I go into all of these different organizations and I'm able, the great bit about one of the genius bits in the PSIRF implementation was making everyone's plans and policies be public. Because so much of what we do in the NHS, although the NHS is supposed to be one big organisation, actually we do a lot of siloed working, don't we? And we kind of do everything behind closed doors. And I think the fact of the plans and policies being public has been really great for helping build that network. So if someone's going, do you know where the best policy is? And I'll go, yeah, Nottinghamshire Healthcare. They've got an amazing policy, probably the best policy that I've read in the whole of all of the policies that there are around PSIRF. And they'll go, oh, do you know where there's a good plan? And I'll say, yeah, well, there's elements of good plans in this and in this one. Yeah. And so, and you're able to signpost that stuff and people can see that. And of course, there's the work that goes in behind it. But I think when you can see that and you can reference what people are doing in their work, I think it's really helpful. And I think it's helping us up the game of what good looks like here and get a feeling for areas that are really doing really excellent work in this area now. There's been such a growth in helped along by the patient safety syllabus, and that all kind of coming together and all speaking the same language, which isn't always the case in the NHS, is it? We often have multiple things coming out that say different things. But we've got this standardization across the piece at the moment that I think is really valuable. And of course, the growth in data from companies such as yours and others that are doing really good things with data. I think we're getting to a really critical mass where we're at a point where it's really exciting to work in this field at the moment. And I think that's really great.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I think it is a very exciting place to be, and to start and see what's happening with it as well, rather than it just being talked about, which is, I think that's the exciting bit, isn't it?
Yeah.
So let's chat a little bit about the maturity framework. So you've been involved in creating this around PSIRF. So can you just chat to us a little more about what this is and how it will help organisations to assess their progress in implementing these safety measures?
Yeah, so we saw a need for organisations to kind of know what's aspirational in PSIRF. So some organisations were doing some things that they thought were great, that other organisations might have been doing for 10 years. And that's still great. Everyone's on their PSIRF journey. But we wanted to help organisations kind of map what the next steps on that journey might be. And so what they could add to their current offering. So it's really in draft stage at the moment. So I'm a little bit nervous talking to you about it. But
don't say too much.
No, all of this is for sharing. All of this, there's nothing new under the sun, is there? This is an offering to try and help organisations. So I'm really happy to share with any of the listeners a draft version with the proviso that they provide some feedback on it. I'd love that. We've got some organisations different. So we've got a mental health trust looking at it at the moment. We've got an ambulance trust looking at it at the moment. And just an idea of trying to get sort of what we should have in place and what would be the kind of gold standard, and then what might be, I don't know, platinum or something like that. What are we aiming for in a journey of like 2 to 5 years time of what our offerings could be? And if I take an example of that in compassionate engagement, like what have we got now? Well, let's say that like basic level, we might have some family liaison officers in place, and we might have, or some people that have some training in doing compassionate engagement in our organisation that speak to those that have been affected by incidents. That's kind of a base level thing. What next could we do? Well, we could describe that. We could have some nice data to describe how that's working, and we might have some different offerings. We might have, let's say, using the Birmingham community example again, we might have built a whole piece of work around learning disabilities. There's a particular need in that area. And then what the next stage might be like, well, actually, we might have gone out and we might have really understood what the needs of our community are. We might have really looked at our offerings and I made sure that those communities that we often don't reach into, that actually our offering is now designed to be bespoke for them. So it might be a different language option, it might be a different way of meeting, it might be joining with some faith leaders in this thing. And what we're trying to do, and this is where I love the feedback, is build examples, so in case studies in from different organisations that are doing those things. So I've mentioned that Community Trust and Mental Health Trust in Oxford have got really good work going on with their patient safety partners, where they're getting their patient safety partner really engaged in that particular bit of compassionate engagement. There's a trust that's doing really good stuff with compassionate engagement of staff. So trying to build case studies, not so this is Lauren's great idea, because it's not Lauren's great idea. And I'm working with Deborah Carter, who's doing it with me. And it's all taken from what's in the standards and what's in the guidance, but really to be able to signpost those trusts that are doing something really good in this area and champion them and allow others to learn from them, whether that's direct or whether that's few futures. I don't really mind, but it's all of trying to get us all as good as we can be in this implementation.
Well, we can certainly help with that. We can reach out to our NHS trusts and encourage them to kind of give feedback. And also when we put the podcast out as well, we can encourage people to get in touch with you and kind of get involved and share things as well.
I hope it's all about Sorry.
Yeah, it's all about just sharing, like we chatted about earlier, best practice, learning from each other, making sure we kind of, this information isn't sort of just lost in a silo in one particular trust, when a lot of the times there's different things that people are doing that you could just pick up and go, oh, actually we do a bit of that, but if we just did it like this, it could make a whole world of difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a really good example of that, actually. I was at a meeting that the Health Innovation Network had pulled together of a group of trusts, and we were talking about data around certain things, and one of the trusts said, well, if you just analysed the data in this way, then actually suddenly you'll have a whole new, and they were and they could see you could see in the room that people were immediately iterating by being in the same space, discussing the same stuff. So I think, and we've got all of that structure in the NHS, haven't we? We've got our health innovation networks, we've got our ICBs to be able to pull us together for collaborating. I think, implementation of PSIRF has been hard, like really hard. It's been really new. It's massive. It's a big change to our governance structures. We've had the implementation of LFPSC along the same time. Off the back of COVID, those governance teams have been hammered over the last 2 years. Now's the time to allow them to get their heads up, have a look around, see what you've done, pat yourself on the back because you've done something huge. You've probably implemented one of the biggest changes that's going to hit the NHS in the last, certainly in the last 10 years. Goodness knows what's going to happen in the next 10. But I think that we have to be kind to each other and recognise where we've come. But yeah, it's a good time to get our heads up and have a look at what's out there.
And it's really difficult, isn't it? Because when you're in the day-to-day, and like you said, they've been hammered, and when you're in when anybody's in the day-to-day of their roles, you do forget that there's potentially something slightly new or slightly different to do, or you just kind of get on with it and put your head down and sort of, get going with it. Whereas actually, if you do have that time to sort of sit and reflect and look at what other people are doing, it does make a huge difference. I know we as a team, a couple of weeks ago, the marketing team went to an event, a Comms Hero event, and we sat in a room with lots of other kind of marketing and comms people, and there was, it was like a conference. And we all walked away feeling really excited and engaged and, oh my gosh, why are we not using this? Or we could look at that, or that's a great idea to use this process, or whatever it might be. And everybody in the team walked away with something slightly different as well, which was so exciting that you just don't get when you're in that constant day-to-day, I don't think.
I think, so the learning responses in PSIRF, so to come back to PSIRF for a moment, actually give teams that opportunity. So I hosted an MDT systems learning response for Birmingham Mental Health Trust the other day. I'm sure they won't mind me sharing. And we pulled together, they were looking at their duty systems, which is how you provide support in the community to mental health teams. And they were doing that proactively. So not off the back of an incident, just on the back of let's pull the teams together. I have never felt such energy. Well, never is probably a bit hard. I've really felt such energy in the room. The clinicians that walked out of the room were beaming, absolutely beaming. They were clamoring to take actions out. I've never had clinicians wanting to take actions out of the meeting. They were sharing ideas. We'd used the systems framework, obviously, to discuss their incident. We'd spend a long time with the governance team looking at what the terms of reference of what we wanted to discuss in the meeting. But largely, we just had them there, structured a really nice discussion around the duty system. And they were able to really see there was a bit of cathartic sort of sharing there of, God, this system's not really set up for us to do the best job that we possibly can do. But by the end of it, we had this really lovely plan of actions from things that they could take away right there and then. So there were some bits of the IT system that some of them were using that others weren't. And the ones that weren't using it, didn't really understand the functionality of it. So that was a really easy action that they could just take out straight away. There were other things that were much more structural in the organisation about how teams are structured, how certain things are resourced within the organisation that were much more for board level discussion. So we had the whole hierarchy of actions coming out of it. But it was absolutely that feeling of, wow, we've had the time to take a pause, to get some headspace and really energize the teams. And I think done well, that's what those learning responses should be and could be. And I think we need that. Teams need that now more than ever, actually. And I think, yeah, it was super positive, and credit to that team for allowing the space and time to do it, because it really worked.
That sounds amazing, and that brings me really nicely onto my to something I wanted to chat about around IT systems. You've briefly touched on it in that. We've chatted a little bit about technology and how that's it's increasingly more important in healthcare, and how people are using it. So, in your experience, how do you think organisations can ensure safety is prioritised in particular when procuring or implementing new IT systems, and just making sure that they work together?
Working together, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? IT systems working together, you'd have thought. So I think, we have a clinical safety case for digital systems, which asks us to have an understanding of the clinical risks. That's really important, really, really important. We need to make sure that our teams are looking at that when they're implementing bits of technology. I think that we know the problems that technology brings us in our organizations, or at least our staff understand that when given the time to think about it. But often we don't test our new system for the problems that we know we've always had. We kind of sucker for the sales pitch of, the system's going to solve all of our problems. And sometimes they really can, but they can only solve our problems if they understand what our problems are. And so if we can describe well what our problems are, then it's an absolute gift to an IT provider to be able to go, actually, with a small tweak, we could fix that for you. And I think one of the other big things is not thinking that technology is going to fix the operational problems in our organizations. So we need to understand how our processes are going to work before we layer IT on top of it. So there's some of that can be fixed by IT. Some of it needs to be fixed by good organizational management, and it's having a clear defining line between what they are. So I've been working with a mental health trust, I won't name them, around their MDT decision-making around a patient, so formulation of the plan for an inpatient mental health service user. And they call them collaborative care plans in name only. So they're not collaborative by any stretch of the imagination. But when talking to the teams, they said, well, we tried to fix this a number of times, but every time we come round to it, we keep getting told this IT system is going to be implemented, which is going to fix it all. And so the team have kind of been stifled out of their improvement for a number of years because they've kind of been waiting for this new IT system to come. And that's wrong. And I see that, that's not unique to that team. I see that time and time again where teams are kind of waiting. In fact, I was just on a call with another hospital trust who were thinking about their medication administration problems. They were like, yeah, but EPMA is coming and that'll fix that. No, understand what those problems are now, because you need to be testing that solution, whatever that tech solution is, for whether those problems are going to be there. Of course, we're not going to be able to design them all out, but we best know which ones we are going to design out and which ones we aren't, and not kind of holding blind faith in a technology solution. So I think that's the key point. Understand what this is going to fix and what it isn't. And for the bits that it isn't, understand what you're going to do with that. Some of that's just going to have to sit on our risk register. We can't fix all the problems, but we need to understand which ones we are and what we're going to do with them.
It's a really key point that as well about, you mentioned about, the staff kind of being told that they're waiting for this IT system and it's going to fix all their problems, because it instantly then puts the system on a pedestal almost, that the staff are going to be like, right, brilliant, that's going to fix everything. And then ultimately when it comes in, it doesn't fix everything, which it's never going to fix everything. Like you said, there's operational things, there's lots of other elements that probably surround it. It almost disengages them instantly from whatever system that is, because it's not done what they've been led to believe that it's going to do as well. So it's kind of got a knock-on effect from that side.
And usability of these systems is sometimes poor, but amplified in the way that because it doesn't understand all of the problems that the staff actually had. So it never had the opportunity to fix them. So I think, there's a real challenge in understanding what the tasks are that you want this piece of technology to try and fix, or what the tasks are that you're going to change with the implementation of this technology. So, and thinking and making sure that you test for that. Like, you have to have testing built into your clinical safety case, and proper testing, not just sitting in a room and having to think about it. Proper testing.
Have you got any examples of that you could share with us in terms of, I guess, when it comes to sort of those larger IT implementations as well?
Yeah, so we're doing some work with a large NHS teaching trust at the moment, and we worked with their SIM centre. They were looking at implementing an electronic anaesthetic chart, and before putting that into theatre, decided to sim it and test it to understand what the risks would be. So we worked together to design what those sims would look like, what the tasks would look like, and really quickly able to see some of the key problems of, so one of the things, for example, requires the clinician to scan the patient's wristband, scan them when they get into the anaesthetic room. And then because this trust, many trusts, anaesthetise in one room, moves the patient into theatre, so they switch anaesthetic machines in that period. They have to scan the patient again when they get into the into the theatre suite, and able to see that actually with a scanner, once the patient's been draped at the point at which you might be doing that scanning thing, that's actually really difficult. Getting to a patient's wristband in an anaesthetic room is really easy. Getting to a patient's wristband when they've been positioned for theatre is sometimes much more complicated. So we were able to see, actually, this is going to be a bit problematic. So how can we make sure that we design the task of when you scan the patient wristband to be at the start of that process? Or can we have a wireless scanner in that situation so that we're not risking decontaminating by pulling a cord across drapes, or all of those things that are, they're not problems for us to solve in the moment, but they're things for us to then think about. How can we help people do the best with the system that they've got? And then looking at same system, anaesthetists can be in a theatre for a long time and need relieving for breaks. And so how do you do that now? What does that process looks like? So make sure that you've got different tasks built into the simulation. So not just the main task of anaesthetising a patient, but also switching anaesthetist, or relieving anaesthetist for a break, or a critical emergency. What's going to happen now? So when we're setting up user testing, we want to know, we want some routine tasks and we want some high risk tasks, and we want to test them both so that we're sure that the system works most of the time and also isn't going to add to the problems in an emergency, because we need it. And you can see systems that have been optimized for one and not the other. And you want to look at some back-end tasks as well, like how do you get the audit data out? How do you do that? So all of those key stakeholders, have them mapped, understand what their top 3 high frequency and top 3 high risk tasks are, and test them. But this is hard. This is technical. We need specialists to be doing this, and there are specialists that can do this. But it's fantastic when done, because you really do find out some stuff that the project team at the start probably weren't aware of. And then that's much safer to find it in a testing situation than to find it the first time when you've got a hopefully live patient sat in front of you, because it's not very fair to be using our patients as guinea pigs in the NHS.
No, definitely not. I think that's such a good tip that people can take away in terms of that, something that they could start and implement into these things when they're considering these systems. So we've chatted a lot about different projects that you've kind of been involved in, and you obviously work on lots of projects at the same time and things like that. So what advice would you give to sort of health and care leaders about embedding safety in technology procurement and system integration processes?
Ask questions about safety. Don't make it all about the finance. So safety is our top priority in the NHS, except that it isn't. Finance is, because we have to balance the books. But can we keep safety as our second priority? Can we ask questions about safety? Ask frontline staff what the risks are. Ask the suppliers how those risks will be mitigated. Ask the suppliers what risks they've mitigated as a result of their user testing. How have they improved this product in line for safety? And if they haven't identified any safety risks, they haven't done proper testing, because every bit of testing will find something. So what do they know their problems are? How have they mitigated it? And do you know what your problems are? And how are you going to mitigate it? And I think once safety is part of the discussion around the table, and it is, but just not to a big point. So look at your business cases. How much of your business case is prioritized for safety? How much of your business case is around numbers? And really making sure that the critique of those business cases, the critique of the procurement, is around safety. I think that's really, really important to make sure that it carries through, because it's hard, because we've got no money, but we need to improve. And so, the eye is on the bottom line, but we need people who understand safety to be asking those questions and make sure that's part of that discussion.
That point you made as well about asking the frontline staff what their risks are, what their problems are, what their challenges are, I think is super important, because I think you do sort of sometimes find that they get missed out of it, and actually they're the people that could be really key in finding solutions, I guess, to the issues that they've got, rather than kind of almost getting a solution that doesn't really sort out what they're kind of the challenges that they're facing.
And all of this stuff is known, right? So good stakeholder mapping, understanding who the stakeholders are, because some wards in some areas will be running at like 40% agency usage. Okay, so we need an agency nurse or an agency staff member stakeholder group then, don't we? We need to make sure that our system is accessible to agency staff members. We can't have an agency staff member coming on at night when we're at our most vulnerable. They're at their most vulnerable because they're helping us out of a tricky situation, and now they can't get onto the IT system. And that is so common that, we lose vast swathes of data because we can't get members of our team accessing the data at the right time in the right place. So making sure that our stakeholders who are asking are the right stakeholders who are asking, and we've got representatives from all of them, I think is really key. But these are big projects, and they're big, expensive projects, and they run at speed and they're tricky. And so we also have to cut ourselves some slack when we miss things. So once during a tech implementation, the IT team proudly wheeled their Wi-Fi enabled laptops into theatre, and when they wheeled them into theatre, they found that they couldn't use Wi-Fi in theatre. And it's a really easy thing as a clinical team to kind of look at them and go, well, you idiots, like, oh, what, you only had to ask. Well, we're going to have some of those in every IT implementation, right? Let's cut ourselves some slack. That IT team, I guarantee, will have been working round the clock to get that project across the line, probably had their timelines halved, probably had their budget slashed. And so let's all be a bit kinder to each other, and let's, so I think every IT project, we're going to have a bit of egg on our face. It's just trying to use testing up front so that we can mitigate that whenever we possibly can, and trying to make sure that it's not a safety egg that's on our face, because that puts risk. So, as far as things went, it wasn't the end of the world. They could just plug it into Wi-Fi, plug it into the socket in the wall. it was fine. But yeah.
I think I went to Patient Safety Congress earlier this year, and one of the key things I took away from more or less every session I seemed to listen to there was that actually everybody's human, and kindness goes such a long way, no matter what the situation is. And it was such a, and people talk about it all the time, but it was one of the, I seemed to take away from so many sessions, and I just thought it was, in any situation, being kind can almost like always make it slightly better, regardless of what it is, I think.
Yeah, and just being aware that like our colleagues are hungry, tired, you probably haven't had a break in the last 8 hours. So if they're not kind to us, then let's cut them some slack too, because, actually most of our fundamental needs are not being met in our workplaces at the moment either. So yeah, it works in all directions. And so be kind when you have the capacity to be kind, but when you don't have the capacity to be kind, like give yourself a break too. So I think it's tricky, because we can all go around saying be kind, can't we? And I've probably done too much of that. But we need to acknowledge where people are at the moment, and it is difficult out there.
It's that everyone's human, really, isn't it? That everybody's got things going on, so you never know that's old saying of you never know what's going on behind closed doors kind of thing. I think is quite important.
Yeah, absolutely.
We touched earlier on kind of the changes that have happened and how kind of things are different in terms of, PSIRF coming in to with a much kind of more optimistic kind of outlook on patient safety and things like that. So in terms of looking ahead to the future, what innovations or developments do you think will have the most significant impact on governance and safety in healthcare over the next few years?
Well, I mean, we're speaking off the back of the budget, where there's a really exciting announcement around the 3.1 billion for the latest technology. Off the back of the Darzi report, where we've got the ambition of analog to digital, I think, it's a good time. And I think what I hope is that we have an opportunity to go, what problems need solving, and get tech to help, rather than here's the tech we've got. Now what can we fix it with? So it's not we've got a hammer and everything looks like a nail, but we need to understand what problems we've actually got and we need them to solve. And I think that there's lots of examples of where we've got brilliant technological developments to try and help us go ahead. I think using our data in a really sensitive way has got to be one of those. So some of the work that you guys are doing and others are doing around how we can analyze our data to provide new insights, I think is really exciting, and has got to be the way. So we're led by, when I first joined the University of Oxford, evidence-based medicine was kind of drummed into my head, and I think we're getting to the point where we're able to have evidence-based improvement in healthcare, and I think that the data that we're going to have available to us will really help us do that.
And that is very exciting, I think.
It is. It really is. And I think also bringing in amplifying the patient voice. The more that we're able to bring patients into this space and bring essentially our users of our healthcare systems into the space and be collaborative in our approach, I think that's got to be part of our design aim. It's not paternalistic medicine. It's got to be with, and I think we've come great strides in making that transition. But I think technology needs to drive that now, and to really help us have collaborative approaches to our healthcare, which I think will help us develop into the next iteration of what healthcare looks like for us.
Fantastic. I think there's been so many good points in there, Lauren, that our listeners can take away, and there's certainly things that I can take away from that. So thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge and expertise across these areas. I think it's been super helpful. At the end of every episode, we like to ask everybody about what the HealthTech moment is. So this started off at the beginning of the podcast as a bit of fun, weird, emotional. We've had all sorts of stories over the last few years. So, and it's just something that's maybe like stuck with you whilst throughout your time in the industry. So, Lauren, what is your what the HealthTech moment?
So thank you. It's nice to have the opportunity to kind of reflect on those things. And there's so many wonderful people that I've had the opportunity to work alongside that I'd love to name check them all, but I won't do that because that would be tedious listen. However, I met Dawn Benson randomly as part of an interview process where I was helping the interview panel choose someone for a job. And in the end, she didn't end up getting the job, but that's not the happy ending bit. Through her story, and she talks about a story, she got into healthcare through her experience of her son being harmed during the birth process. And what working with Dawn has allowed me to do is get an insight into the lived experience of patients and caregivers in our health system, and having that continual check on the content that I may teach or the area that I'm working in, or just and it's not just Dawn, there's so many different patients, service users, families, advocates that I've worked with along the way, but Dawn has been the one that I've worked with the most. And yeah, so I guess it's not a lot of the HealthTech moment, but it's kind of a starter of my journey in that way of making sure that, as practitioners, we can get really caught up in efficiency or safety or, what the job is to be done, but making sure that we hold patients really and their families really central to everything that we do, I think is the most important thing. So thanks, Dawn.
What a wonderful moment to end on. I think what's so lovely about that is we started this podcast talking about how much people care that work within health and social care. So I think that is a wonderful moment, and thank you so much for sharing that story with us. So thank you everybody for joining us this week, especially to you, Lauren, and to everybody for listening. Join us for another brand new episode in a few weeks' time. And don't forget to rate and subscribe. And if you've got any questions for us or our guests, please email whatthehealthtech@radarhealthcare.com.